I didn't notice anything strange the first time I watched the footage. It was just someone sitting at a desk, typing. An ordinary employee, working late. The problem was that the timestamp in the corner of the screen read 3:27 a.m. And the building where I work doesn't have a night shift. It never has. There is no cleaning crew, no overnight duty, no in-house security. After midnight, the place is completely empty. I watched the entire video expecting something supernatural to happen. A shadow, a glitch, a cut. Nothing. The person simply worked, typed, stood up, used the printer, adjusted the chair, as if they were exactly where they were supposed to be. It was only when I paused the video and went back to the shift spreadsheet that I understood the real problem. There was no one who could possibly be there at that hour. And yet, someone was working the shift. Watching the footage for the third time, I noticed a detail that had slipped past me. The employee didn't look lost. He didn't glance around. He didn't hesitate. Every movement was precise, repeatable, as if he were following a routine he had known for a long time. When he stood up from the desk, he adjusted the light above his own workstation, something only people who work there usually do. I zoomed in on the image. The badge was turned inward, making the name impossible to read. But the electronic reader had logged the access as valid. The system showed no error. It issued no alert. It did not question the presence. And in that moment, I realized something even more unsettling. The timestamp on the record was not marked as extraordinary. It was classified as a regular shift. Hey, family, how's it going? That introduction sent a chill down your spine, didn't it? Imagine opening a system log and discovering that someone is working inside an empty building. If you enjoy this kind of corporate mystery, go ahead and leave your like down below and subscribe to the channel. Turn on the bell too, because at Whispered Terrors, terror arrives without warning, and you won't want to miss what Ethan discovered inside that building. My name is Ethan Walker. I'm 36 years old, and I've worked for almost 6 years in a corporate building in downtown Columbus, Ohio. It's not a special place. Quite the opposite. It is exactly the kind of building you forget the moment you leave it. Gray concrete, mirrored facade, generic reception desk, electronic turnstiles, and a security system that works more to satisfy protocol than to actually prevent anything real. The building houses accounting firms, law offices, and technology companies. Nothing operates outside business hours. By 7 p.m., the last employees leave. By 10 p.m., the cleaning crew finishes its shift. After that, the building enters what they internally call passive mode. Minimal lights, air conditioning off, sensors active only for logging purposes. There is no night work there. There never has been. I know that because part of my job involves auditing digital access. Not armed security, not physical surveillance, data, logs, schedules, entries and exits. Everything the building remembers about who has been there. I always thought that system was excessive for such a common place, but I never questioned it. Large buildings like to seem organized. That week, I was reviewing old reports because of an update to the control software. Nothing unusual. Compare records, verify inconsistencies, validate timestamps, until a pattern started repeating on different days. Between 3:00 and 4:00 in the morning, always on the same floor. At first, I ignored it. Motion sensors fail. Cameras trigger on their own. That happens. But what caught my attention wasn't the alert. It was the type of activity being recorded. It wasn't random movement. It wasn't a flickering light. The system indicated continuous workstation use, power being consumed, printer activated, local lighting adjusted. All of that in a building that, at that hour, should have been completely empty. Reviewing the records more carefully, I realized the system wasn't marking it as an exception. There was no irregularity warning, no automatic alert, no field in red. To the building, that activity was normal, regular. That was the point when I did something simple. I opened the official shift and schedule spreadsheet. I checked the names, times, contracts. No employee, contractor, or security worker was authorized to remain there after midnight. And yet, someone was working. And the strangest part was not the fact that there was activity at 3 in the morning. It was the uncomfortable feeling that, to the system, it had always been part of the routine. I have always been the kind of person who trusts records more than impressions. Not because I'm cold, because of habit. I grew up in environments where everything had to be documented in order to exist. If it wasn't written down, it hadn't happened. That mindset naturally led me into fields connected to control, verification, and auditing. I didn't protect the building. I validated it. Inside the internal system, I wasn't treated as someone who made decisions. I was classified as a consistency function. That meant my job wasn't to prevent failures, but to confirm that they did not exist. If something appeared outside the standard pattern, I had to prove it was a technical error, or adjust the parameter until it stopped being treated as an exception. I always thought that description was exaggerated, but it made sense. My official hours were from 9:00 a.m. to 6:00 p.m., a Monday through Friday. I came in, sat at the same desk I had used for years, accessed the same panels, and left without taking work home. I never liked overtime. I never stayed late. I never had any reason to know the building when it was empty. So when the records started indicating after-hours activity, my first reaction wasn't fear. It was correction. I thought it was a software failure, a badly applied update, a sensor that had become too sensitive. That kind of thing happens when systems are old and nobody wants to stop the building long enough to review everything. I checked the automatic validation parameters. They were correct. The interval between 3:12 and 4:01 appeared marked as a valid operational period, not as an exception, not as a test, as if that time frame belonged to the building's basic logic. That bothered me more than it should have. I reviewed old contracts, archived spreadsheets, disabled schedules. The building was more than 20 years old. It had gone through mergers, acquisitions, and management changes. Even so, I found no record of a night shift. Not permanent, not temporary. What I found instead were empty fields, spaces reserved for data that had never been filled in, as if someone had anticipated the existence of something and then decided not to name it. When I cross-checked my own profile in the system, I noticed another curious detail. My access level was higher than I remembered. I could view areas that, in theory, were not part of my role. Disabled cameras, archived logs, reports of hours that never appeared on the main panel. I had never requested that access, but the system assumed I needed it. That night, for the first time, I thought something that until then had seemed absurd to me. Maybe the building was not logging a failure. Maybe it was simply recognizing a function, and maybe I had been involved in it for longer than I remembered. The footage that started everything was not dramatic. There was no strange noise, no image corruption, no audio distortion. If someone had shown me that video out of context, I would have assumed it was just another employee staying late to finish some task. The frame showed Workstation 3B on the 12th floor. An ordinary desk, 2 monitors, a keyboard, an ergonomic chair. At 3:27 a.m., the light above the station turned on by itself. Seconds later, the chair was pulled back and someone sat down. The face wasn't visible. The camera was positioned too high. What appeared was an ordinary body, Light-colored shirt, sleeves rolled up, posture slightly bent forward. Nothing stood out. Nothing looked wrong. He started typing. Not randomly. Not like someone testing something. He typed with a steady rhythm, regular pauses, like someone following a familiar procedure. He would stop, look at the screen, jot something down in a paper notepad that I knew stayed on that desk, a detail only someone who worked there would know. At 3:41, he stood up, walked to the shared printer, picked up a few sheets, checked them quickly, and returned to the desk. At 3:52, he adjusted the chair height. At 3:59, he turned off the light. At 4:01, the camera registered no movement. The system marked end of activity. What bothered me was not the video. It was the log. The access to the workstation had been registered as valid. No authentication error, no warning of unauthorized access. The system recognized that user as authorized. More than that, it recognized him as routine. I reviewed the records from previous days. The same pattern repeated. Always at the same time. Always at the same station. Never outside the interval. Never on weekends. Never on holidays. The building did not wake up at night. It maintained a specific shift active. Zooming in on the video frame by frame, I tried to identify any detail that might expose a flaw, a wrong reflection, a movement delay, something that didn't belong to that environment. I found nothing. The employee moved like someone who knew exactly where he was. It was only when I paused the image on a specific frame, the moment he stood up from the chair, that I noticed something too subtle to be comfortable. The reflection in the glass behind the station did not follow the movement precisely. It wasn't delayed enough to be a common technical error. It was an adjustment, as if the image were being corrected to align better with the body. I closed the video. For the first time since I started working there, I felt something that did not appear in any report. The sensation that the building was not being observed. It was executing. The next day, I did what any rational person would do. I tried to turn it into an ordinary problem. Something that could be solved with a conversation, an email, a system adjustment. I started with HR. I didn't go in with, "There's someone working at 3 in the morning." I asked as though I were checking a simple piece of information, with no intention of causing alarm. "Is there any outsourced night shift? Any team that comes in after hours?" The HR woman, Megan, didn't even need to look at the system. No. Once the cleaning crew leaves, the building stays empty. Someone only comes in for emergency maintenance, and even then it requires formal authorization. I asked for the schedule from the last 6 months. She sent it to me within minutes. All the names, times, linked badges, no shift between 3 and 4 new a.m., no one with fixed permission during that interval. Then I went to security. The supervisor on duty, a guy named Hollis, was the kind of professional who has already seen everything and, because of that, tends to disbelieve anything that sounds like a story. I showed him the video clip, already paused at the part where the employee was walking toward the printer. Hollis looked at it, tilted his head, and let out a short, like someone trying to fit that into some mental archive. "That's too clean," he said. Normally, an intruder looks around, hesitates. "That guy looks like he works here." I nodded. "He does," I replied. "Except nobody works at that hour." He asked to see the access log for Station 3B. I opened it right there on the panel. The access was listed as valid. No alert. No exception. Hollis frowned. "Then it's someone with a badge. If it were, HR would have a name," I said. He asked for the badge number. I enlarged the record. And that was when reality started becoming uncomfortable. The system did not show a full number. It showed a field that should have been filled in, but appeared as though it had been normalized. The code was there, but it seemed to have been replaced by a generic value, as if the system were avoiding the registration of something specific. The best way I can describe it is this. The access existed, but the identifier had been softened. Hollis didn't like that. He pulled footage from other cameras on the same floor. Hallway, meeting room, elevator lobby, all at the same time frame. The same figure appeared in two different places, at different moments, always within the interval. Always, naturally. Until, in one short segment, the figure passed close enough for the angle to capture the badge hanging from the waist. The badge was turned inward, as if someone didn't want to be identified. What should have been a banal detail hit me like a slow conclusion. This was not an intruder trying to get in. It was someone who was already authorized, and the system behaved as though there were nothing wrong. Hollis stayed silent for a few seconds. Then he spoke in a lower tone, almost too professional. Sometimes we get ghost access records, values that disappear from the panel and keep existing on the server. But this here is different. He clicked Permission History. The field authorized interval for that access was marked as 0312, 0401 regular, and the shift description, in small letters, was what made me hold my breath for the first time since all of this began. Shift 0, shift 0. I looked at Hollis expecting him to laugh, to say it was some old bug. He didn't laugh. He simply closed the window, as if he had opened something he shouldn't have. "Have you ever messed with this?" he asked. I answered honestly, "I didn't even know it existed." And from the way he avoided looking at me, I got the uncomfortable impression that the building did. You can feel the weight of that silence from the security supervisor, right? Hollis realized he had touched something he shouldn't have. But what about you? What would you do if you saw a shift 0 at your workplace? Leave a comment down below if you've ever felt like you weren't alone during overtime, or if your office has some strange story. I really want to know what you're thinking about this atmosphere. After Shift 0 appeared in the system, I could no longer look at those records as simple data. Before, they had been cold lines, timestamps, codes. Now they carried a different weight, as if every entry held a silent intention. I decided to map everything. Not one day, not 2 months. I created a parallel spreadsheet outside the official system. I listed dates, times, triggered cameras, power consumption, printer usage, activity duration. I was no longer trying to prove that it was real. I had already moved past that phase. I wanted to understand how it worked. The result was disturbing in its precision. The Shift 0 employee never appeared before 3:12 a.m., never after 4:01 a.m. Not 1 minute more, not 1 minute less. There were no exceptions. Holidays? Nothing. Weekends? Nothing. Maintenance days? Nothing. It was as if the building respected the human calendar until that specific interval. As if there were a window that could not be moved, negotiated, or ignored. Another detail started to stand out: the total absence of improvisation. He always used the same workstation, always the same chair, always the same routes. He never sat at another desk, never explored the floor, never looked out the window. The behavior was functional, not curious. He did not look like someone working late. He looked like someone executing a defined task. I also began noticing what did not happen. During Shift 0, no other camera was activated without direct need. Motion sensors only reacted when he passed by. The system seemed to optimize resources around that specific activity, as if the rest of the building could wait. It was too efficient. I cross-referenced that data with old energy consumption reports. The pattern had existed for years, long before I worked there, long before some floors had even been renovated. Shift Zero had not started recently. It had simply continued. It was during this stage that I began to feel something different while analyzing the records. Not immediate fear, something subtler. A strange, almost automatic expectation whenever the clock approached 3 in the morning. My body reacted before any conscious thought. I knew that, at that time, someone would be working. And the building knew it too. One night, without planning to, I realized I was awake at 3:10 a.m., staring at my phone clock. There was no reason, no alarm, no notification. And yet, I opened my laptop. I accessed the system. At 3:12, exactly as always, the light above workstation 3B came on in the camera feed. No delay, no anticipation. As if that time were more real than the rest of the night. I closed the laptop slowly, with the uncomfortable feeling that I was not merely observing a pattern. I was aligning myself with it. Sada first person. Functional uncanny valley. The more I watched the Shift Zero recordings, the less frightening they seemed in the traditional sense. There was no hurry, no hesitation, no mistake. The employee did nothing strange. He did exactly what one would expect from someone working. And that was what bothered me most. He always arrived at workstation 3B with the same rhythm. He adjusted the chair before sitting down, not after. He touched the keyboard for a second, as if waking up the equipment. He always opened the same windows on the screen. I recognized the layout because it was the same one I used during the day. There were small habits that appeared in no manual. He pushed the chair back a few inches before standing, so it would not hit the desk. He aligned the printed pages by tapping the edge lightly against the table. He always placed the pen on the right side of the notepad, even when he did not use it. Things only someone who has worked in that building long enough learns to do without thinking. In one of the recordings, he stood up, took 2 steps, stopped, and came back to turn off a lamp he had forgotten on. There was no alarm, no automatic energy-saving system requiring that. It was simply a corrective gesture, a responsible one. I started comparing his behavior to my own in old daytime recordings. The resemblance was uncomfortable, not in the body, but in the rhythm, in the way he paused, in the time between one action and the next. At one point, I noticed something that made me close the video for a few seconds. He never looked around. Never. He did not check doors. He did not react to sounds. He showed no attention to the environment beyond what was strictly necessary to complete the tasks. It was as if the building were a completely trustworthy space at that hour, as if nothing could interrupt him. Another thing became clear. He never took anything with him. All the files created during Shift Zero were temporary. Prints disappeared afterward. Folders appeared and were deleted without any manual record. The work was done and consumed right there. Nothing from that shift seemed intended to exist outside of it. I began to wonder whether that really was an employee, or if it was simply the form the building had found to execute pending functions when no one else was available. In one specific recording, at 3:58 a.m., he stopped typing and remained motionless for almost 20 seconds, just sitting there, staring at the dark screen. It did not look like rest. It looked like waiting. Then, exactly at 4:01, he stood up, turned off the light, and left the frame. Not a second more. The camera returned to its inactive state. The building, once again, seemed satisfied. That was the point when something changed in me. Not fear, not yet, but an uncomfortable understanding that this behavior was not merely normal. It was necessary. And if it was necessary, Someone would always have to do it. After weeks of observing Shift 0, I realized there was an inconsistency impossible to ignore. The system registered activity, but it did not register results. Energy consumed, equipment used, usage time validated. All of that existed, but the content of the work did not. I decided to dig deeper. I accessed low-level logs, the kind no one normally checks because they are useless for ordinary auditing. Raw logs, temporary files, records that exist only to guarantee that the system can recover from a bigger failure. That was where I found something strange. During the Shift 0 interval, file entries appeared that never showed up in the main structure. They had no defined name, no fixed extension. They were identified only by incomplete hashes, as if the system had started to register them and given up halfway through the process. Those files existed for only a few minutes. Then they disappeared. They were not deleted. There was no deletion command. They simply ceased to be accessible, as if they had never been fully written. I tried recovering older versions. Nothing. I tried accessing automatic backups. Empty. I tried simulating failures to force the system to restore data. No effect. It was as if whatever was produced between 3:12 and 4:01 could not exist outside that interval. I started suspecting something even more uncomfortable. Maybe the work of Shift 0 was not information. Maybe it was adjustment. I compared building metrics from before and after the time window. Power consumption slightly stabilized. Small sensor corrections that, during the day, I never remembered making. Micro-alignments in access systems that simply worked better after 4 in the morning. The building seemed more efficient, more stable, as if someone were correcting small imperfections that accumulated throughout human use. One night, I observed something that made me go cold. At 3:36 a.m., the employee was typing into a screen that did not correspond to any known software. It was not an operating system, not the internal control panel, not a standard graphical interface. The screen looked too functional. Simple blocks, clear lines. Nothing designed for human interaction over long periods. The cursor moved with absolute precision. At 3:44, the screen went dark on its own. In the log, a single line appeared. Process completed. Status. Stable, no reference. No identifier. No task associated. Only stability. That night, I closed everything. Not because of direct fear, but because of a deeper sensation that I was observing something that should not be interpreted, only executed. And for the first time, I wondered whether the system was truly hiding what was happening, or whether it simply was not meant to remain. I decided to stay, not out of curiosity, not out of courage. It was a practical decision, almost automatic, as if the next logical step had already been determined before I consciously accepted it. If Shift 0 existed only during that interval, then the only way to understand what was happening was to be present when it began. I told work I would stay late to review overdue reports. No one questioned it. At 7 o'clock, the building began to empty as usual. At 10, the cleaning crew left. After that, silence took over the hallways. I was alone, or at least, that was what should have been happening. At 2:47 a.m., I was sitting at my desk on the same floor as Workstation 3B, with the lights dimmed. The building looked different at night. Not threatening, just too functional. Every sound had a clear origin. Every light had a purpose. It was as if the place were in a state of waiting. At 3:10, I opened the camera panel. Everything normal. At 3:12, exactly as in the records, the light above Workstation 3B turned on, but no one passed through the hallway. No door opened. No elevator was called. No sensor-registered movement toward that point. The light simply was on now. The camera showed the chair being pulled back by itself. It moved a few inches backward, stopped, and then slid slightly forward again, as if someone had adjusted the position before sitting. The keyboard began to respond with small, visible vibrations on the desk. I was watching it in real time. I stood up slowly, trying not to make noise, an absurd gesture, considering there was no one there to hear me. I walked toward the hallway, keeping enough distance not to enter the camera's field. When I looked directly at workstation 3B, I saw something the recording did not show. The chair was occupied. There was not enough clarity to distinguish the face. The lighting was too low, but there was a body there, leaning forward, typing. I went back to the monitor. On the camera, the frame showed exactly the same angle as always. But now, there was a minimal delay between the movement I saw live and what appeared on the screen. It was not a transmission failure. It was as if the image were being adjusted to align better with something that did not fit perfectly. At 3:28, the figure stopped typing. On the camera, it turned its head slightly. Not toward the hallway, toward the lens. I felt my stomach tighten before I even understood what that meant. The system registered a new log entry. Observation detected. There was no alarm, no sound warning, just that silent record, appearing where it should never have existed. The figure resumed typing, but now the rhythm was different, faster, more precise, as if compensating for some interference. At 3:41, another line appeared. Process realigning. I closed the panel, not because I was afraid of being seen, but because I had the clear feeling that, in that moment, I was no longer just an observer. Things have changed now, family. Ethan is no longer just a spectator. He has become part of the system. If you're enjoying the atmosphere of this story and the way every detail was crafted to place you inside that dark corridor, check whether your like is on. That helps our community a lot to keep bringing these unique stories to you. After that night, I could no longer treat Shift 0 as an isolated anomaly. If the system reacted to observation, then it was not just some old technical error. It was something anticipated, planned, quietly integrated. I started looking for records that were not kept in the obvious places, not in the main system, not in the active reports, but in old, discontinued files, forgotten after management changes. That was how I found a dead directory on a legacy server, a space that only appeared when the system was accessed with permissions that, until recently, I did not remember having. The directory had no description, just a short abbreviation, TZ. Inside were scanned documents, old PDFs, manuals that had never been updated to modern digital standards. Everything seemed to have been created specifically to avoid attention. One file in particular made me stop. It was an operational guide, not for employees, for the building. The document described something called Shift 0 as a structural correction interval, a period outside human hours, reserved for tasks that could not be carried out during the normal use of the space. There was no description of what was being corrected, only the indication that the function had to be executed daily. One sentence, buried in the middle of the text, made me reread it several times. In the absence of a designated operator, the system must ensure functional continuity through compatible reallocation. There were no names, no titles, only functions. Another section stated that Shift 0 should not be mentioned in internal communications, financial reports, or official schedules. It did not exist for administrative purposes. It existed only to guarantee continuous stability. The most disturbing part came at the end of the document. A simple table, almost innocent, listed operator compatibility criteria: familiarity with the system, prolonged exposure to the environment, ability to observe without interference, availability outside regular hours. All of the fields were marked as variable, except one: status, active. I closed the file, feeling something strange in my body. Not immediate fear, something quieter. A sense of delayed fit, like when you come across an old word and realize you have always used it, without knowing its exact meaning. Shift 0 was not a secret shift. It was a functional state, and the employee was not hired. He was allocated. That same night, at 3:12 a.m., the system registered activity as usual. I was not in the building. Even so, everything functioned. The employee appeared, but when I reviewed the recording afterward, I noticed something different. The figure moved with small delays, tiny corrections, as if it were being adjusted, as if it still were not completely defined. And for the first time, I had the clear feeling that this was not happening despite me. It was happening because of me. After finding the Shift 0 documents, I tried to act as if nothing had changed. I kept going to work at the same time. I kept analyzing ordinary logs. I kept replying to emails about trivial things. But there was something different in the way the building reacted to my presence. The cameras began showing brief glitches whenever I was nearby. They did not shut off completely. They only lagged by a few seconds, just enough to break the continuity of the recordings. When I moved away, everything returned to normal. I started noticing it in the details. Lights that took longer to come on when I entered a room, doors that required 2 badge attempts, elevators that took longer to respond when I was alone. Nothing serious. Nothing that justified a maintenance call. But too constant to be coincidence. One morning, when I accessed the main panel, I saw my name appear in a field I had never seen before. Passive monitoring, active. It was not an assignable function. There was no option to disable it. It was simply a state. I tried to ignore it. That night, I woke up at 3:14 a.m. for no apparent reason. There was no noise, no dream, only the uncomfortable certainty that something was happening. I opened my laptop almost by reflex and accessed the remote system. Shift 0 was active. Workstation 3B appeared to be operating. But this time, the camera showed only the empty desk. The chair was adjusted. The keyboard slightly displaced. The screens were on, displaying an interface I did not recognize. The log showed commands being executed. Someone was working, but there was no one in the frame. I watched for several minutes, trying to rationalize it. Maybe the camera was failing. Maybe the angle was wrong. Until a new line appeared in the log, without any highlighting at all. Access profile updated. My stomach tightened. Updated for whom? I opened the details. The profile associated with the change was mine. The next day, I tried to talk to Hollis. He was no longer in the building. Transferred to another unit, I was told. Megan, from HR, seemed not to remember the conversations we had. When I mentioned Shift 0, she only frowned, as if I had brought up something too irrelevant to be recorded. I went back into the system. My work schedule had changed. Not officially. On the contract, it was still 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. But the internal panel showed something different. An additional interval, not highlighted, fitted between the early mornings. 03:12, A04 and 01, not as a shift, as availability. I tried to remove it. The system refused. I tried to register an exception. The field would not accept text. That afternoon, I found something new on my desk. An extra badge, identical to mine. No printed name, no photo, just an active code. When I passed the badge through the reader, the green light came on immediately. The system did not register duplication. It registered continuity. That was when I understood. Shift 0 did not need to be observed. It needed to be maintained. And I was beginning to interfere with that balance. The extra badge was not a warning. It was a preparation. In the following days, I started noticing small alterations in my routine that I did not remember making. Appointments automatically rescheduled, meetings pushed later, alerts appearing outside my normal hours, always high priority, always without a clear sender. Nothing felt like an isolated error. Everything worked too well for that. When I accessed my full profile in the system, something I had never done before, I realized there were 2 active versions associated with my name. One matched my official contract. The other had no job description, no department, no supervisor. Just a field filled with something that should not have existed. Function. Operator. Shift 0. I tried to disable that profile. The system replied with a dry message, without technical error, without a failure code. Action not necessary. From that day on, the Shift 0 employee began appearing less and less in the recordings. He did not disappear all at once. He became redundant. On some nights, Workstation 3B remained active, but without any visible movement. On others, the camera did not even register a presence, only energy consumption and completion logs. It was as if the building were testing something new, testing continuity. I began to feel the effects of it outside work. My sleep started fragmenting. I woke up constantly between 3 and 4 in the morning with the feeling that something needed to be done. Not a clear thought, a vague, functional urgency, like a task you forgot to finish before leaving. On one of those early mornings, I found my laptop open on the living room table, powered on, logged into the corporate system. I did not remember accessing it. The log, however, showed valid activity. No remote access, no intrusion, just my user executing basic commands, small adjustments, quick checks, clean termination, process completed. Status: stable at work. My coworkers began acting strangely, not hostile, just aligned. Whenever I mentioned hours, someone would always correct me to later. Whenever I talked about leaving early, someone would comment that it made no difference. One sentence started repeating itself in different contexts. The building needs to function. That week, while reviewing the cameras, I realized the Shift 0 employee no longer appeared. Workstation 3B remained active. The work continued to be done, but the figure was no longer there. In its place, there was something even more disturbing. The rhythm of the actions, the pauses, the micro-adjustments, the way the chair was pushed backward before standing up. Everything matched my own habits perfectly. Not by resemblance, by functional substitution. And that was when the question changed inside me. It was no longer who is working at that hour. It was, how much time is left before they no longer need to pretend it is me during the day. The story has crossed the line now. Ethan is no longer investigating something outside himself. He's being replaced from the inside out. If this kind of slow, psychological horror is your thing, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and that the bell is turned on, because the next mystery might start exactly where this one ends. Shift 0 simply stopped. There was no warning, no error, no system alert. One night, Workstation 3B did not turn on. At 3:12 a.m., nothing happened. At 3:27, no activity was registered. At 4:01, the panel was still empty, exactly as it should have been. For the first time in months, the building truly seemed to be asleep. Over the following days, I reviewed everything with excessive care. Cameras, sensors, power consumption, access logs, no after-hours records, no strange lines, no automatic executions. It was as if Shift Zero had never existed. The system was clean. I felt relieved, not all at once, but gradually, like someone stepping out of a noisy environment and only realizing the silence after a while. I slept through the night for the first time in weeks. I did not wake up at 3 in the morning. I did not feel that vague urgency in my body. At work, everything returned to normal. My duplicate profile had disappeared. The field operator Shift Zero no longer existed. My extra badge was no longer in the drawer. When I looked for it, I found nothing. No issuance record, no request, nothing. I casually asked Megan whether anyone had been transferred or dismissed recently. She said no. I asked about Shift Zero. She laughed, thinking I was talking about some old technical term. If something like that existed, I'd know, she said. And for the first time, I believed her. I spent days trying to find proof of what had happened. The documents on the legacy server had vanished. The TZ directory no longer appeared, not even with administrative permissions. The old recordings were corrupted or replaced with empty files. It was as if the building had performed a complete cleanup, a cleanup far too careful to be coincidence. I started to think that maybe everything had been some prolonged error, an old bug, an unlikely chain of failures that my mind, under stress, had turned into something bigger. Until one ordinary afternoon, while reviewing my time records, I noticed an almost invisible detail. My checkout time was correct. My check-in time was too. But there was a new field, unhighlighted, in the middle of the weekly report. A short interval, recorded without any special marking, as if it had always been there. 0312. AO401. No description, no justification, no associated activity. Just the record of presence. That night, I woke up at 3 in the morning with the calm sensation that something had already been done. I did not need to get up. I did not need to open the laptop. I felt no urgency. I felt completion. That was when I realized the mistake. The employee had not disappeared. He had simply stopped being necessary. It took me a few days to accept what that interval meant. Not because it was difficult to understand, quite the opposite. Everything made sense too quickly. What took time was admitting that normality had returned. In the wrong way. My job remained the same. My co-workers remained the same. The building kept functioning with the same efficiency as always. Nothing broke. Nothing failed. No system required off-pattern maintenance. It was as if something had finally been adjusted. I started paying attention to myself, not out of paranoia, out of consistency. I began noticing small gaps in the early mornings. Not full blackouts, just the feeling that the time between 3 and 4 no longer belonged to me in quite the same way. Sometimes I would wake up with the laptop closed on the table, still warm, as if it had been used recently. Other times, I found simple handwritten notes, checklists, circled numbers, small reminders, things I recognized as my handwriting, but did not remember writing. Nothing urgent, nothing emotional, only functional. I reviewed my own logs, not the building's, mine. Computer usage, nighttime activity, minimal movement inside the house. Everything perfectly clean. No remote access, no security breach. Everything validated as if it were an old routine. I started talking less about Shift Zero, not because I was afraid people would not believe me, but because the explanation no longer seemed necessary. The building was stable. The systems were working. The problem had been solved. One morning, arriving earlier than usual, I passed by workstation 3B. The desk was clean, the chair adjusted. The lamp positioned at exactly the right angle, exactly the way I like to leave it. I felt no discomfort when I noticed it, only recognition. Later, when I accessed my full profile in the system, I saw that the availability field had been updated. There was no duplication, no exception, just a discrete note with no visual emphasis. Operational status. Continuous. It did not say active. It did not say in use. It simply said that the function was guaranteed. That night, I woke up at 3:11 a.m. without an alarm. I did not feel rushed. I did not feel afraid. I got up, walked to the desk, and opened the laptop with a movement too automatic to be conscious. The system was already open. The correct windows, arranged exactly as they should be. At 3:12, I began. There was nothing special to do, nothing urgent, only small adjustments, small corrections, things that ensured everything would continue functioning the way it should when people came back. At 4:01, I closed everything. I went back to bed with the calm feeling that the building would no longer need to correct itself on its own. The next morning, I reviewed the daytime reports as usual. No one said anything. No one noticed anything. And that is what disturbs me most now. Not the fact that I work while I'm asleep, but the fact that if I stopped, someone would have to take over. Some sleep with the light on. Others sleep with their eyes open. And that was the story of Shift Zero. Creepy to think that the building shaped Ethan until he became the missing piece, isn't it? But now I want to open the floor to you. What did you think of that ending? Leave a comment below. We read absolutely everything, and we really love this exchange with you. And tell me this too. Where are you watching this video from? I'd love to know your country, state, and city, so I can see how far the echoes of Shift Zero are reaching today. Do you have any suggestion for a real horror story? Something strange that happened at your company or in your town? Send it to me. Maybe your account could become the next video here on the channel. And don't leave just yet, family. Take a look at the other videos appearing on your screen. Every story here on the channel is unique, edited individually to capture the full atmosphere of the account. Thank you for everything, family, and I'll see you in the next mystery, if the building allows it.